Elon Musk's DOGE, the Department of Governmental Efficiency, is going after a U.S. government agency known as USAID. And in response, progressive, woke, Democrat politicians, bureaucrats, and employees of supposedly charitable organizations are losing their minds. But what is USAID? Why is it being targeted by DOGE for elimination with prejudice? And why are so many hysterically intent and determined to protect it at any cost? That's what we're here to talk about today, so let's jump right in. I am, of course, attorney Andrew Branca for the Law of Self-Defense. Let's start with a hard truth, folks. For many years, certainly for most of the 6 decades of my life, the United States federal government has been little more than a massive money laundering operation that happens to have a military. The highly productive American economy generates huge wealth. Last year, our national GDP was about $30 trillion. Human brains have a hard time with numbers that large, so let me put that figure into context. If you did some task, pressed a button, once a second, each and every second, without rest, to do that 30 trillion times would take you almost 1,000 years. And when human beings see such wealth, literally unimaginable wealth, it's only human nature that they'll start figuring out how to steal it. Of course, you can't just walk into some building with a gun. That's not how modern financial systems work. Instead, you have to cloak the theft as if it were a legitimate financial transaction. Of course, if you want to steal very large amounts of this wealth, and who wouldn't, you can't have just one faked transaction, you need many. And if you don't want to get caught, you want not just a single chain of fake transactions, but a spider web of them, so that the ultimate recipient of the stolen wealth appears disconnected from the initial act of theft. At this point, we're engaged not merely in theft, but in money laundering. The ultimate purpose of the stolen wealth, of course, is not to benefit the nation, but to benefit the thieves. The thieves must ensure that they don't obviously appear as thieves or the jig is up. If someone in government just embezzled public funds and bought a Ferrari, people might ask questions. So the stolen funds must be laundered so that the ultimate purchase of the Ferrari can be made to look like a legitimate purchase. Let's walk through a simple notional illustration of how this kind of money laundering works. A woman, let's call her Karen, works for a notional federal government agency. Let's call it USAID. And she has the legal authority to distribute funds, say $10 million a year, as part of her job. Of course, she can't just cut a check to herself for any sizable portion of that, or she'd end up in jail for embezzlement. She is permitted, however, to spend that money on some purpose purportedly in America's interest. She finds an organization whose nominal mission is to teach poor children how to read. Let's call it the Read Better Foundation. She notifies them that they are the lucky winner of a $10 million USAID grant. Well, that's sure going to teach a lot of kids to read, $10 million, right? Nope, it's all a grift. When the Read Better Foundation receives that $10 million grant, the large bulk of it, maybe all of it, is immediately absorbed by their own internal salaries and other costs. Maybe as much as 10% of that amount ultimately goes to the purported purpose of educating poor children how to read, but maybe not even that, maybe none. We'll never know, because nobody ever bothers to check. And coincidentally, Karen receives a contract from the Read Better Foundation as a consultant to advise them on this and that and the other thing, and is compensated several $100,000 a year for her expertise. So Karen gets rich, the Read Better Foundation gets rich, the poor kids get maybe cents on the dollar in benefit, and the American taxpayers just got ripped off to the tune of $10 million. Of course, even this simplified example would likely soon lead to Karen being found out and prosecuted. So in the real world, these money laundering affairs are not only a multi-step process, but they are an intricate web of mutually engaged entities, many thousands upon thousands of them, scaled up to an industrial level through which literally billions and even trillions of American dollars are being stolen, aggressively laundered, and then distributed to benefit the thieves and their collaborators, who now number perhaps in the hundreds of thousands. Even worse than the thieves simply enriching themselves financially, however, is that these giant streams of stolen money are then used to gaslight and propagandize the American public generally to blind them to how thoroughly they're getting robbed, as well as to advance policies that the American people would utterly reject if they knew that they themselves were paying for it. And all of this thievery is cloaked in a facade of doing good. It's all for charitable purposes. It's to help immigrants, or to stop AIDS, or to provide clean water, or whatever nonsense they make up to conceal their thievery. Of course, virtually all the monies end up in pockets other than the purported purpose of the spending. Because the thievery is cloaked in good works, however, anyone who is seen to be taking too close a look at these monies, or asking what's going on here, or heaven forbid, actually threatening the continuation of the thievery, they must be some monster, acting out of malicious hatred for these poor immigrants at risk of AIDS who lack clean water. Do all of this long enough, and it just becomes a standard part of how the government operates, and people hardly notice. Indeed, a lot of the thieves stop thinking of themselves as thieves at all. This is just how things are done. Standard operating procedure, perfectly normal, nothing to see here. And care is taken to spread all that stolen wealth around to the right places and the right people to enrich and protect the participants and keep the victims from even noticing. Now, in the case of USAID, which stands for United States Agency for International Development, USAID is the organization that is perhaps the greatest source of thievery of public funds that has ever existed in the history of mankind. And the money laundering webs it has created consist of thousands of willing and willfully ignorant participants, including thousands of non-governmental organizations, thousands of academic centers, universities and colleges, really all of them, and of course, thousands of individual consultants. Collectively, these organizations are a cohort of many hundreds of thousands of people whose entire incomes are a function of having their own cup under the spigot of money laundering revenues that have been stolen from the American people. And this cohort necessarily includes, of course, even the highest level government officials, including senators and congressmen, and certainly our last president and his entire family, because what better way to keep the grift going than to ensure that the people best positioned to end it are themselves personally benefiting financially from the grift. So when President Donald Trump and Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency threaten USAID, they are threatening the source and distribution of vast amounts of wealth being stolen from America and redirected to various favored persons and groups. And virtually all of those benefiting groups are on the political, progressive, woke DEI left. In fact, when one looks at campaign contributions of USAID employees, fully 97% of their political donations go to left-wing candidates. Naturally, this political bias is reflected in who they choose as beneficiaries of their theft and money laundering, and what kinds of public policies they choose to support with these spider webs of laundered funds. So if you've never even heard of USAID and are shocked at the astonishing intensity of the reaction to President Trump, Musk, and DOGE threatening the existence of that organization, now it should all begin to make sense. There are literally hundreds of thousands of people for whom either their entire financial lives, or at least a sizable portion of it, is purely a function of participation in some facet of the giant USAID theft and money laundering operation. If the spigot is turned off, they will feel real pain. And again, this includes America's most senior politicians. So when you see U.S. senators and congressmen screaming into microphones while protesting in the streets or trying to bully or sneak their way into USAID headquarters as if they were merely better dressed Black Lives Matters or Antifa activists, as shown in this post, there's a reason why. And it's not because they're concerned that the poor immigrants at risk of AIDS who lack clean water are going to suffer. I mean, they look utterly panicked, and I expect because they are. This is Chuck Schumer, one of the most senior Democrat members of the U.S. Senate, and he's practically incoherent.
I'm going to stand with you in this fight. And we will win. 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 We won't rest. We won't rest. We won't rest. We won't rest. Thank you, everybody.
I mean, that's a grown adult U.S. senator. These are people who have been well paid for long periods of time through the USAID grift, including, I expect, sizable kickbacks to politicians. They have built their entire lifestyles, including their mortgages, around the expectation that these revenues would continue flowing their way. Many of them also have few, if any, economically viable job skills. Their only real skill has been in giving away taxpayer money within these money laundering spiders' webs of graft. And now they are facing existential economic destruction. So their protests are sincere enough, but they're not protesting out of concern for others. They are protesting in their own interest and the imperative they face to keep the USAID graft flowing or to suffer personal financial catastrophe. Now, I don't want to make this show several hours long, so I'll just share with you some illustrative exhibits of the points I've just made. I mentioned spider webs of money laundering, and here's just one example. There are many thousands of other ones, much like this one. When you look at this chart, each one of those squares represents a node in this money laundering operation, and each line represents the flows of millions of dollars. You see the total amount being laundered through this one spider web at the top. That's $17 billion, billion. And who are the nodes? Who are these boxes? Well, they're all some form of government agency, usually the initial source of the funds, and then a cabal of purported charitable organizations, academic centers, and research institutes. I know the chart is hard to read, so I'll just cite a few of the names for you so you can get a sense for the look and feel of these things. Some of the nodes are the National Endowment for Democracy, Freedom House, Consortium for Elections, National Democrat Institute, Global Community, Save the Children Federation, Institute of International Education, Justice Innovation, Tides Center, Environmental Defense Fund. They all sound like they're doing good works, don't they? There are, of course, academic centers. Here we have the University of Pittsburgh, Vanderbilt University, Columbia University, but really every university, excepting perhaps Hillsdale College, is involved in one or more of these money laundering webs. And of course, given the sums of money involved, major financial institutions are happy to offer their own money management services. So here we have Fidelity Investments Charitable Gift Fund, Schwab Charitable Fund, and more. Really, every financial services organization, large or small, would be professionally remiss if they didn't seek participation in one or more of these money laundering webs. There's just too much money there to ignore. And at the very far right, we have the node for the Institute for the Study of War. Sounds great, right? War is horrible. It should be studied so we can avoid unnecessary war. But when you look at the board of that institute, you find that it's thoroughly populated by progressive woke politicians and their political hangers-on. And how many wars have they actually studied, much less stopped? What percentage of that 17 billion fed into this one spider web is actually going to any purported good mission, as opposed to being sucked up into the personal bank accounts of the hundreds of thousands of executives and managers and staffers and consultants engaged by these nodes of thievery and money laundering? The examples of how these stolen monies are diverted to purported causes that I rather doubt most Americans would be willing to pay for if asked is far too numerous to list here. It surely numbers in the hundreds of thousands of fabricated excuses to claim a privilege to American taxpayer money. But I feel obligated to provide at least a few examples. Here we have job opportunities for LGBTQ people in Serbia, 1.5 million. Electric vehicles for Vietnam, 2.5 million. Helping migrants readjust to living in their own country, 3.2 million. Why would you need help in adjusting to your own country? Being LGBTQ in the Caribbean, 3.3 million. Promoting atheism in Nepal, $500,000. Here's more examples. USAID has awarded almost $1 million to Stephen Leonelli of Washington, D.C. for supporting Development, democracy, and innovation inclusive development hub programs protecting the human rights of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and intersex individuals. USAID grant, $400,000 to a Spanish agency whose name I will not try to pronounce. Why are we giving $500,000 to a Spanish agency? Another USAID grant, $2 million, again, to a Spanish-led agency to strengthen trans-led organizations to deliver gender-affirming healthcare, advocate for improved quality access to services, provide economic empowerment opportunities in Guatemala. USAID, $40 billion to fund foreign aid, including $45 million to DEI scholarships in Burma. $520 million for consultant-driven ESG investments in Africa, $1.2 billion to undisclosed recipients, $1.5 billion to another group whose name I won't attempt to pronounce. This activity aims to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion in Serbia's workplaces. Why? USAID here focuses on trans abortion activism in new report featuring bizarre terms and creepier imagery, and that is pretty creepy imagery. USAID handed hundreds of millions of dollars in aid in the past year to Palestinians. $230 million in Palestinian aid added to $190 million just months prior. Why? And here's a lengthy list. I won't read all of these from a Betty Johnson X.com post, but here are a few examples of the ones he's pointing out that I really think are worth mentioning. $1.14 billion to build a port in Haiti. The Clintons were behind this one. The port was never built. Where did that money go? $74 million to Cuba for democracy promotion. We have no idea where that money went either. $40 million to a Chinese-based gain-of-function virology lab. That's the one that gave us the gift of COVID and crashed the world economy. $27 million to left-wing prosecutors to fund lawfare against Trump. And Somalia has received $2 billion in just the last 2 years. For what? Where did that money go? What did America get for it? Who authorized this? Who is held accountable? We could spend years identifying all of these unimaginable sums of stolen money. Folks, it's just being stolen by the progressive woke left and the Democrats. So when you hear protests that, well, maybe this is stealing and a misdirection of funds and money laundering is bad, but in the greater context, it's only a tiny portion of the total U.S. budget. Just think to yourself, first of all, $1 billion here, $1 billion there, and pretty soon you're talking about real money. Second, the money isn't just being taken, it's being used to harm America and Americans. As an aside, did you ever wonder how all those Black Lives Matters and Antifa protesters could spend months after month rioting, looting, committing the arson of our American cities with no apparent need to ever go to a job? Were Black Lives Matter and Antifa, our own homegrown terrorist organizations, were they funded through one of the thousands of USAID spiderwebs? I don't know. But if DOGE were to find such funding connections, would any of you be surprised? Finally, the reason U.S. senators and congressmen are attempting to storm the USAID headquarters in Washington, D.C., is precisely because they are terrified we'll learn what the true figure of fraud is and how much they have taken themselves in illegal kickbacks. Kickbacks of the sort that only recently put their colleague, Senator Menendez, in prison for 11 years. Perhaps worst of all, from an existential threat to the U.S. perspective, is that absolutely enormous sums of American taxpayer money through USAID has been spent to illegally import tens of millions of third world migrants into America, effectively displacing American citizens, diluting and destroying our American culture and civilization, and forcing all Americans to compete with third world illegal migrants for scarce American resources, including job and educational opportunities, housing, food, healthcare, public safety, and much, much more. I mean, that would be worth a whole show all by itself. Again, it's worth noting that the people who were supposed to benefit from all this see at most pennies on the dollar. very little of this money is going to create any benefit to the people who are the offered excuse for the money. At least 90% of the money is being absorbed like water by a sponge, by the executives, managers, staff, consultants who make up this cancerous spider webs of theft and money laundering. Or even worse, much of it is being stolen by bad actors, by terrorists and leaders of terroristic states whose primary mission is to kill Americans and damage the interests of America and our allies. Folks, we are funding through USAID our own enemies. Certainly, Trump is unhesitant to bring this enormous money laundering and graft to light, including his interest in investigating any parties, including our own politicians, who may have been benefiting from kickbacks. Asked about Elon Musk recently, Trump responded in this way.
Oh, many ideas, but look, he's done a great job. Look at all the fraud that he's found in this USAID. It's a disaster what the people, radical left lunatics, they have things that nobody would have even believed. The whole thing with $100 million spent on you know what, with money going to all sorts of groups that shouldn't deserve to get any money. With the money, I'd like to see what the kickbacks are. How much money has been kicked back? Who would spend that kind of money to some of the things that you read about and I read about and I see every night on the news and every morning when I read the papers? Who would spend money for that? I would say this. The people that got all that money, are they kicking it back to the people that gave it from government? No, that's, to me, very, very corrupt. The real question is, how much of a kickback has there been? And one of the things I want to invest.
So if USAID is so obviously corrupt and damaging to Americans and America's national interest, why should it be so controversial to shut down USAID and similar graft enterprises? Because when USAID is threatened, all these spider webs of money laundering, and here's a second example, this one based around the Defending Democracy Together Institute, whatever that is, all these spider webs of money laundering are threatened. All the hundreds of thousands of people engaged in or benefiting from this criminal enterprise are threatened. Hence the intensity of blowback to any threat to USAID. And of course, DOGE is not targeting only USAID, but similar grifts and waste throughout the government, in every agency. It's all like a metastatic cancer. It's everywhere throughout the body politic. USAID is particularly notable only because it is perhaps the single largest source of these grift funds. So when you see mobs of people in the DC streets protesting like we see here, that's why. They see their grift about to take a spear through its liver, and they're terrified. And in fairness, in many of their minds, they think they're just good people doing good work, but they're doing it with our stolen money, and we've had enough. As one clever wit put it on X, President Trump has decided America will no longer be a sugar daddy for other countries. Hoes be mad. Indeed. And not just other countries, but our own American social class of unproductive, blood-sucking, progressive woke DEI left elites. The good news is that it certainly appears that USAID, at least, has been mortally wounded. The organization was, remarkably enough, founded by a mere executive order from President John Kennedy, and so it's subject to the whims of the executive orders of our current president, Donald Trump. And we've already heard what Trump thinks about USAID. President Trump's newly appointed Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, has assumed the top leadership position at USAID, and DOGE has taken over USAID headquarters, including all its computer systems, and is poring over all its records, and the erstwhile employees worldwide have been locked out of their computers, and the flow of payments has been ceased. Even better, a letter has just been distributed to USAID employees informing them that they are collectively all on administrative leave, effective immediately. This is merely a precursor until they are formally fired. And certainly Elon Musk himself is pulling no punches, noting quite correctly that USAID is a criminal organization. Time for it to die. Indeed, Elon, I concur. Arguably, we will not really know the full extent of the USAID spiderweb of corruption until we see the consequences of the turning off of the spigot of their ill-gotten revenue streams. It will be interesting to see which non-governmental organizations, indeed which media organizations, abruptly find themselves cash flow negative or even immediately bankrupt as the USAID spigot closes. One wonders what the housing market of Northern Virginia will look like if, as I expect, several 100,000 residents who have been living large off USAID and similar graft suddenly find themselves unemployed and effectively unemployable. They say you know which dog you hit by the dog who yelps. A great chunk of the deep state is rapidly arriving at the find out stage of F around, F out. And I'm here for it. As usual, I'll close out by reminding all of you that if you carry a gun so you're hard to kill, that's why I carry a gun so I'm hard to kill, so my family is hard to kill, then you also owe it to yourself and your family to know the law so you're hard to convict as well. Until next time, I remain Attorney Andrew Branca at lawofselfdefense.com. Stay safe. Hey folks, I want to take just a moment to invite you all to our upcoming live and 100% free Law of Self-Defense Hard to Convict webinar. This free webinar teaches you how to be hard to convict if you're ever compelled to use force in defense of yourself, your family, or your property. The webinar is live streamed by me personally, and there's plenty of opportunity for Q&A. Best of all, it's 100% free, but we do limit seats to allow for adequate Q&A. So I urge you to grab your seat right now by signing up at lawofselfdefense.com/hard to convict. In fact, go ahead and pause this video and grab your seat right now. I look forward to seeing you all there.